Welcome to another episode of Nant Fawr Brews. My name is Andy. I'm a home brewer and general beer enthusiast based in Cardiff in beautiful sunny South Wales. I always say it's sunny, but it genuinely is today, which is great. And Nant Fawr is a Welsh phrase. It means big stream or big brook. And this podcast is all about sharing that vast stream of brilliant stories that are around as soon as you talk to anyone about beer or you open a beer, the stories, the people, they just come out. And that's what this podcast celebrates. And we have got a fantastic guest today who has already warned me that he's very good at telling stories. So I'm looking forward to this. And I was trying to work out how to describe this guy. And what I came up with was almost like a one-person beer industry. He's kind of done everything that you can possibly do in beer. And there's a particular project called Labels Off that we really want to talk about as well. So look, let me not talk too much about him. Let me just introduce him. It's Steve Dunkley, otherwise known as Beer Nouveau. Steve, how are you?
I'm all right, and that's actually a really quite good description of me. Actually, I do seem to get into everything. It's one of the things I actually really think is very important for anybody in beer is look at all of it. I actually recently joined the British Guild of Beer Writers, and they asked me to write a bio, and I had to think about what the hell am I going to write about that? That it doesn't sound like I'm making it up, and of course it did sound like I'm making it up, but it's I came up with something like they're a holistic beer and brewing writer, because it's one of the things that you've got to do really is you can't talk about one aspect of the industry without understanding all of the rest of it in a way. So yeah, I kind of am a one-man brewing industry. You know, I started out as a cellarman. Well, I started out as a glass collector, and then worked my way through to cellarman and sort of like all of those side of things, and then running a sort of like a brewery. But now that I sold the equipment and the bar, I've got a lot more time on my hands. So that's kind of where this Labels Off thing sort of like came through. I think I was having a discussion with somebody in a bar, and I think the fun has gone out of beer in a way, and we're giving beers and we're told this is a beer, this is what you're going to drink. And it used to be, what are you going to provide me? It used to be far more the consumer, the drinker. I have to admit, I hate the word consumer. The drinker used to sort of like go around and was more sort of like in charge of what they were drinking, whereas now it seems to be more that the brewers in charge of what they're drinking. But I think it's gone a little bit too far. And we were discussing some beers that we were drinking, and somebody gave me this is in a bar with a few mates. And somebody gave me a beer, because me and a few mates, it's not a game that we play, it's a way that we drink. It's whoever's going to the bar to buy round, and it's basically, what do you want? Well, it's dealer's choice. Whoever's going to the bar decides what you're drinking. And they came back with a beer for me and I said, this is awesome, what is it? And they said what it was, and I was like, this is not a West Coast. It's a really, really good beer, but it is not a West Coast IPA. And we just got round to sort of like discuss about this. And it's just I think it's one of the things that's kind of missing in the beer world at the moment, is there is no real sort of like knowledge about what the beer styles are. I mean, you as a home brewer, you will know what a beer style is. You're brewing a beer to style, and you will make it like that. But then you go out and you buy it, and if you know like a beer style and you think, yes, I really like that, I really love West Coasts, I'm going to order that, and it turns up and it's murky. I mean, this is not a West Coast, but if it looks like this, it's not a West Coast. I'm really trying hard not to swear.
And you're doing well.
It's you should know what a beer is going to be when you buy it. If you buy sort of like a New England IPA, it should turn up and it should be murky or sort of like hazy. It should have these wonderful juicy flavors. If you buy a West Coast, it should be crystal clear. It should be slightly sort of like copper ruby colored. It should have these wonderful resinous flavors. If you buy an Imperial Stout, you want to know that's what you're going to get. If you buy a Porter, you want to know what that's going to get. If you buy a mild, well, actually these days, who knows but when it comes to mild. But I think we should know what we're getting. But it's also one of these things as well, with several beers are put out as the best examples of the style, and to be blunt, they're not. They may be good beers, but they're not a great example of that style, or in some cases they're not really great beers, they're just pretty decent. And some of them as well, they were amazing examples. They were They were like the first out there, or the second or third out there. They were quite early out there, and they were exceptional beers. But other breweries are doing it better.
Yeah.
And you've now got sort of like annual releases of some beers that are still as good as they were to start with. But that's all they are, is as good as they were to start with. The brewery itself has moved on. It's producing even better beers, but they just seem to be churning out the same recipe, the same beer, because that's what sells and that's what everybody's going for. And that brewery can do better. So I just came up with this idea. It's like, I just want to take all of the hype away from it, all of the marketing, all of the names, everything like that, and say, well, let's get it back. Let's get it back to people actually just getting a beer, not knowing anything about it, and see whether they love it or not. And this is what it used to be when I started brewing about 8 years ago, or even before that. You'd go into a tap room, you'd never heard of the brewery, you didn't know what they're doing. You tried a beer and it's like, oh my god, it's great, or I'm not trying that again. You weren't really influenced about it so much, and it's one of the things that. I was a little late getting to this because I was very late in the bar, because I got into a conversation about how it used to be that you'd go to these brew taps, you didn't really kind of know anything about it, because the breweries that you'd go to were very anti-hype, anti-marketing, anti-establishment. And it's like, yeah, we're just doing this because we can. And in a little bit of a way, they're kind of getting into that themselves, where it's like, they've got people working with them to do all of the marketing for them, and you have to in this industry these days, because the market is really, really horrendous. It's any people will turn around and say, there's too many breweries, there's too many beers. No, there isn't. It's too little of the market is taken up by the smaller brewer. Too much of it is taken up by the macro brewer. So it used to be that we there's a few breweries after a small piece of the overall share, and now it's quite a few breweries after an even smaller piece of the overall share. So rather than sort of like working against each other, we need to get together and we need to work to increase the overall share of the market that we all have. But to do that, I think we actually have to have the best that we can be. And sitting on your levels isn't going to give you the best that we can be.
Yeah.
So I did warn you I talk a lot.
No, it's good. You've covered a lot of the questions I was going to ask in your first answer. But tell us exactly how Labels Off is going to work. So as I understand it, you've contacted a few breweries, getting them involved, but talk us through what it actually means and how it's going to work.
Well, I didn't contact any breweries. Rather weirdly, it's there's one other brewery. I mean, we're after venues, and so there's Temple Street Brewery in Manchester, who's what was my old venue. So I'm a little bit biased about that. And in Liverpool, we've got Carnival Brewery, but they're the only breweries that are actually involved in it. So in Chester, there's that beer place. In Leeds, there's Friends of Ham. In Macclesfield, there's R&G Beer Fault, and there's a few others that we're talking to. Every venue will run it differently. So the idea originally was I wanted to do a blind tasting session. So the idea was I'd talk to people about the beer, the history of the beer style. And I keep using West Coast as an example because it's the one I want to start with. And so we talk about where the West Coast IPA came from. Then we talk about the style guidelines for it. So we'd go through what BJCP says it should be, what its color should be, what the malt should be, what the hop should be, what flavors, what aromas, and what taste people should be getting out of it. And then we present everybody with 6 different beers that are marketed as that style. So you have no idea what they are. You don't know what breweries they are, let alone what beers they are. It's just 6 glasses, all poured out of your sight. You've got no idea what it is. And we go off one after the other, and in a kind of like a guided tasting session, we talk our way through each beer that we're tasting, what flavors people are picking up, what sort of like aromas they're getting, they're getting from it, what the sort of like the color may be, and then we also talk about whether we, as a group, chatting away with it, think it actually fits the beer style guidelines or not. And we do that for all 6 of them. And then at the end of it, we ask people to rank them their favorite to least favorite. So 6 through to 1. We add all of the scores up. And then after that, only after that we go through them and say, right, so in 6th place was such and such, and then we start letting people know what the beers actually were. So up to that point, nobody has a clue what they're drinking. And I'm kind of hoping to do it so even I don't know what's coming out. I mean, I'll know what the beers are, but I don't know what order they are in or anything like that. So that's just the way that I'm setting up. Other venues may do it differently, how they actually, sort of work it. I mean, I'm looking to have a guest co-host with me each week or each month as well. So somebody that either brews the style or is known for brewing the style, or somebody that is just really good with beer. So that we can just talk people through learning about the beer style that we're doing that month, as well as then sort of like seeing what they think about it and get the feedback from them about it. So it's there's a lot of education with fun, sort of like bringing it, but not the forced fun aspect of it. Although, when we do the triple IPAs, there may be sort of like a lot of alcohol forced fun in that. So it's and the barley wines, I'm really looking forward to doing the barley wines. But yeah, so each session will be done differently according to which venue's doing it. We're doing it on different dates as well. It's not like every month everybody is going to be doing it on such a date with these beers. The way that we're setting it up is that there's a central spreadsheet that we've got that has got a list of, like, say again, go back to West Coast IPAs. We'll have a list of about 24 beers that are readily available that are marketed as West Coast IPAs, and then each venue can just pick 6 from that they want to use. So it doesn't matter if one venue does it on a Thursday night, the next one does it on the Friday, the next one does it on a Sunday afternoon, and the people at the first one doing it tweet out what they were drinking and say, oh, and it was such and such. Because then somebody going the following day, if they've seen those, but it doesn't matter. They're not going to be getting the same beers. And even if they were, they're not likely to be in the same order. So that itself doesn't really matter. It's kind of become, I mean, it started out as an idea that was just something I was going to do, but it's kind of become a bit like a cross between a franchise and a co-op. So we're all kind of working individually under this overall branch name, of Labels Off, but everybody's able to do it how they want to do it, and everybody feeds back in. So if there's a drink of that style that they want on the list, but it's not on there, they just add it to it, and it's entirely down to them. I was one of the bottle shops I was talking to that's wanting to do this and is doing this. They'll say, well, we stock a good range of these beers, but generally when people come in, they're only after the one of them that everybody's heard of.
Yeah.
But we curate our list, we check it, we want to make sure that people have tried all of these because these are the ones we think are great. So they're able to, for this, be able to pick the one that's really popular and 5 that they stock on a regular basis anyway, and just see people's reactions about it, whether the one that everybody seeks out is actually the worth seeking out, or whether their curated list is a little bit better because nobody will know what on earth is going on. So it's how each individual place runs it is down to them. You could say, come along to the one in Manchester, and there would be me talking a lot with a co-host who would be there. In fact, along to especially knowing about it and talking to talk about it and just be not able to get a word in edgeways. Or you could go along to one, say, like Carnival Brewing down over in Liverpool, and the guys down there, I mean, they know their stuff when it comes to beer, but they're likely to just hold back and let everybody else talk because they're not, they're very quiet about how good they actually are. And you might get to the beer place in Chester, and they might throw in some real curveballs of styles just to see what people think about that and see what people's reactions are. So it's the sort of thing where you could possibly go to 4, 5, or 6 of these, different, venues that are doing this, and maybe only come across 3 or 4 of the beers differently. So the 3 or 4 of the beers in each of the places, but each event itself will be run differently by the venue that's doing it, how it works best for them. So it's not like a nationally, this is how you actually have to do it. This is the idea, you do it to suit you.
Brilliant. And what I like about it is it's a great way to discover a style. Like, I still think for people who are getting into a brewing or beer for the first time, it can get very confusing, all the different styles. And you speak to someone who's maybe been involved with the scene a bit longer, and you think, wow, they know straight away what something is, and I don't know that. But with this, you would have such a range that all fall still within that one style, that it's going to help you broaden your understanding of what that style really is. So I think it's a great idea, and it's definitely something I hope somewhere in Cardiff gets involved with this. Maybe I'll suggest it for
I would
Pops
love
and Hops down
somewhere.
Whitchurch Road. That might be quite good. They'd like to do that.
I would love somewhere in Cardiff to get hold of this, because you've got a really great homebrew scene down that way. The Rebel homebrewers, they're really good. They are really good, actually. They know their stuff. But I would love to do this, because for homebrewers, it's an amazing opportunity to try commercial beers, a range of commercial beers, without knowing which is which, to see not necessarily which ones you should be mimicking or that, but to get an idea of what the style is actually like, and to talk about that sort of like style with everybody else. That so if you're considering going commercial, you're able to talk with people who are drinking it, and see which aspects of the style work for them and which aspects of it doesn't. And because I help organize the Manchester homebrew group, and I was talking about it at the club the other week, last weekend, and they were saying again, it's a great opportunity to learn about a beer style, which doesn't really exist like that unless you make the effort yourself to go out and find somewhere that has, say, 6 West Coast, 6 Mountain IPAs, 6 East India Pales, 6 pastry stouts, all on at the same time, that you can compare and contrast, and find somebody who knows about it to talk about it. You're not necessarily going to learn about it in one session. Excuse me. It's a lovely beer, but it's quite gassy. So I do think it's a great idea, and I really am surprised that nobody's done it already. I mean, there's a few places that have done the odd occasional blind tasting session, but not really in this sort of way, as like an educational, have fun sort of thing.
So if people want to find out about it, I see that you've launched a little independent Twitter channel for Labels Off, haven't you? Is that the best? Is that the best place where people to go get info?
For the moment, absolutely, yeah. I seem to launch Twitter accounts for each of these different aspects of the industry that I get involved in. But this one is really taken off. I'm very surprised in a way how quickly it has taken off. It came up. I just came up with the idea to. I was talking with Nikki at the Cat in the Glass, and just thinking of ideas that try and help her sell some beer, because I helped her get up and running at the start of the lockdown, and she's doing pretty decent with the cider aspect of it, but she could do with selling some more beer, and it's really weird and annoying, because she's getting in some amazing beers from all over the world that you just wouldn't normally see over here. And this is why I'm drinking it, these beers, the site out there beers. So one of the things that she does is, if a beer goes out of date, she just gives it to me to drink, which is great. It's sort of like a thank you for helping me set up. But I'm getting some beers that I should not get. I mean, things like some Wildflower, some Trillium, some other half. This is stuff that you should be getting hold of and going for. And but people just don't kind of know that she's got it, or don't know that what these beers actually are. So it's kind of come up with this idea. It's like, okay, so doing something like this could be good fun. And then it's just taken off. Everybody else is like, this is such a great idea. We really should be doing it. And it really has taken, so that, I say, we've got what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 initially, possibly 7 actually, and about another 7 or 10 venues that are likely to come on in the next month or two. So it just seems like it has just hit the zeitgeist. It's like, we want to do this. We want people to just try the beers without knowing what they are, just actually learn about it and enjoy drinking it without any preconceptions. Because it's not just the I mean, I know I've mentioned about there are some beers that have got the hype, and are they up to it? But there's also some beers that you might avoid. Some of the old family brewers, especially, or some breweries that are seen as traditional and a bit old-fashioned, and it's like, oh yeah, why would we touch those stuff? I don't really like them. But you try, and it's like, actually, this is really good. So why aren't we drinking more of this? So it's kind of leveling the playing field across the board with all of this.
I think also one thing that I've always really believed in since I've started brewing is you're allowed to like what you like. No one can tell you not to like something. and
Yeah, absolutely.
whether that's based on a label or, like you say, a perception of a brewery that may be out of date.
Mm.
And it's fine for you to like what you like. I used to have the same arguments about music back in the day with people saying, oh, they've sold out, or they're just trying to write a hit. And I'm like, you can like what you like, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's all there to be enjoyed. But
Well,
since you talked about the kind of the scene in the UK, and you were talking about helping your mate out who started the bottle shop. And that's something I wanted to ask you about, because another thing I noticed you doing a lot in the last few months is, or a few years, is actually kind of keeping track of beer closures in the UK, which is obviously a kind of sad thing. And I wanted to ask you about that because you've really tracked it, and you've obviously, I'm sure, spent a long time talking about it. Where do you think we are at the moment in terms of the UK, and is the scene going to be okay, or should we be worried?
a bit of both, to be quite honest. I started tracking brewery closures in probably about March or April 22. I can't remember which brewery closed, and it's like, well, how many is that now? And nobody knew. And I put out a tweet, it's like, well, how many breweries? And people just nobody actually knew how many had closed or anything like that. It's like, okay, well, this is bad that we don't keep a track of this. We only keep a track of the launches and the beer launches. We should be keeping an eye on the closures. There's so many people who are really, really good brewers, really really good breweries. What we need to know this. We need to. It seems very macabre to keep an eye on it, but I thought we had to. Because otherwise we're just going to keep going along with it. Yay, everything's great, everything's awesome. No, it's not. So I just started keeping a track of that, and then at the end of the year, it's like, this is a lot. This is far too many, and I think that made a lot of people very aware of how bad it actually was. And I then initially decided I wasn't doing it this year. It was very much like rubbernecking a car crash, especially since as I was able to sell my kit and brewing and keep brewing. It just didn't feel right. But quite a few people turned around to me and said, look, can you please do it, because we want to know. And so initially it's like, well, why do you want to know? I mean, are you wanting to rubberneck? It's like, well, no, because we need to know what the state of the industry is like. It's the same sort of question that you just asked, is how is the industry? And without this record, we don't really know. I mean, nobody actually even knows how many breweries there are in the UK. I don't think HMRC even know, because once you take cookie breweries into account, so the people that aren't registered with HMRC but are in their own effect, like me these days, they are in effect their own brewery. It is something completely different. So it was interesting to keep an eye on it in last year, and it's been interesting this year so far as well. I've tried to be better this year with putting up reasons for closure, where they were, the date of it. I started keeping a list of breweries that went into administration. I got a bit of stick about that, because I would put out a tweet or a post saying updated to conclude such and such going into administration, and people initially thought, oh, that brewery's closed. It's like, it's completely different. It's not the same. So I ended up having to change that list and make it a bit more, because if a brewery is putting itself into voluntary administration, it doesn't necessarily mean it's closed. Most times it doesn't. It just means that they are looking for a buyer to take the brewery on, and it's kind of like a last ditch sort of thing. I think out of the 3 or 4 breweries this year that have announced they're going into administration, only one of them hasn't sort of like been bought out of it. So it's more of a case of just keeping an eye on the state of the industry, rather than say this brewery's closed. Oh no, it's open again. Yeah, it's quite depressing reading, because every brewery that's on it, not everybody that's on it, but when you look across all of the breweries that are on it, it's very across the board. It's not just small, what some people say, hobbyist breweries. It's also places. It's like Black Sheep went into administration, and they've just recently been bought out of it. Unity closed, and now they're back out of it. So it's like, well, these are big established names. why are they closing or going into administration? And yeah, it's been very strange, but I think the industry is going to change a lot over the next couple of years. The changes to the duty structure, especially, are going to make a massive difference to that. Basically, with the new alcohol duty system that's coming in, any brewery whose average ABV is above 4.5% is screwed. You're going to be paying a lot more duty than you did beforehand. Any brewery whose average ABV is less than 4.5%, you're going to be getting some massive kickbacks on it. So you look at some of the old traditional family brewers whose average ABV is about 3.8 to 3.9. They are going to be making some money. There's one brewery in particular, I can't remember off the top of my head which one it is, but they were one of the proponents of the Small Brewers Duty Reform Coalition. And previously they had no sort of like duty relief because they were too large. They are now set to save about £260,000 a year in duty.
Wow.
Because most of their beers are lower strength. So they not just come under the limit, but they make a massive tax saving on that. Then there's other breweries. There's a craft brewery I know of who previously got 50% duty relief because they were a small brewer. They are now set to be paying about an extra £55,000 to £60,000 a year in duty on their current limits because their average ABV is 6%, because they do quite a few dippers and tippers. That's 2.5 people's wages a year. So that's 2.5 people are suddenly going to become either unemployed at this brewery, or they have to hope people pay more for their beer. So we're going to see a massive change in that aspect of it. This is where the whole holistic side of things come into it. We can't just look at one aspect of it. We've got to look at the all of it. So some of the traditional family brewers who have got their own tied pub estates suddenly making a lot more money from that. They'll be able to invest in those pubs, buy more pubs, enlarge themselves as breweries. The smaller craft breweries are likely to have to start putting up their prices. It's going to be harder for them to compete. But then we've also got the sort of like the change that has come in because of the ciders farm gate allowance. So previously, if you were running a cidery and you produced less than 7,000 litres of cider a year at 7%, you didn't pay any duty. Now, that's changed. It's part of small producers relief, but that also means it applies to beer. But the cider producers complained that they then gave brewers an unfair advantage. So it's now, if you produce less than that amount of beer, you only pay 90%. You get a 90% duty relief, so you only pay 10% of it. So we may well find a lot of brew pubs suddenly kicking up. So pubs and bars sticking a 1-barrel kit in the back of their, in an unused kitchen, unused function room, bit of space in the cellar, brew 1 barrel of 4.5%. I think it's 1 barrel of 4.5% a week or less, and you will still only pay 10% duty on that. So that sounds like, a lot of places could just do their house pale ale and get a much cheaper brewing it on site. So we may see some roving brewers go around and brew one day in one place, one day another place. But it also means a pub can stick in a 30-litre brew kit or 35, I'd say 40-litre brew kit, or ideally a 50-litre one, and brew 8.3% imperial stouts or dippers or tippers. And still only have to pay 90%, so get 90% duty relief on it.
Looking at it positively, when you were saying all that, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if you end up with pubs that never would have thought of doing their own brewing, almost having a kind of brewer in residence, like you might have had an artist in residence type of thing. And wouldn't that be great? Because it's opportunities for people, maybe even home brewers like me, to go, okay, I could go and brew in that pub once a week, and they know that there's going to be someone there who's passionate about it. So that could be a really good thing. I mean, I guess I always try and be positive about stuff. So I was trying to look on the bright side of those.
That's one of the major positives that I see about it, is we are going to see a much wider range of breweries available. But we are going. I think we're going to lose the 2.5 to 8 barrel breweries. I think they're going to go because they
That is
just
a
can't
shame.
compete.
That is a shame
But
because that's a
oh
real
yeah, absolutely
source
is.
of creativity and innovation within the industry,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
But we will hopefully see the 50 litre to 2 barrel ones creep up in pubs. So yeah, people like yourself, if you can brew decent beer, then
Big if.
I and this is it. I can see people like yourself being, if you can brew decent beer, pubs will employ you to do it. And I think we can see the resurgence of the brew pub. And this itself can be really good, but it's going to be a massive change to the brewing scene over the next couple of years as
Yeah,
it starts to settle down.
that's interesting. Now, we've been talking a lot, and you have been giving some brilliantly detailed answers, as you warned me you were going to do. But we haven't actually got long left. And one thing I really wanted to ask you about, because I think it's fascinating, is you're one of the brewers that I think most has looked backwards to go forwards. In that
Absolutely, yeah.
you've really investigated the history of brewing. You've unearthed some ancient, well, not ancient, but old recipes, and then been
I've done the
surprised.
ancient ones as
You've done
well.
the ancient ones as well. So I guess maybe my final question is just to give you a chance to talk about that, because I find that fascinating, and maybe there's a couple of stories from that where you tried old recipes and were just surprised at how well it turned out.
I could go on for this for hours. What I will do is I'll summarize it and say brewers need to embrace the hop creep. Hop creep is something that modern brewers turn around and say is really bad. It leads to exploding cans, amongst other things. But the previous
Just
perception.
explain what it is for people who might not know what hop creep is.
The previous perception is that hops were added to beer to keep it fresh. It was a preservative. It's not. What's actually happening is when you make beer, you warm up the malt, and the enzymes on the malt convert the starches to sugars, which is then later the yeast converts to alcohol and carbon dioxide. That same enzyme is actually on hops. So when you get really hoppy beer, that enzyme in the can or in the cask or in the keg keeps converting those starches to sugars. And any residual yeast, and unless you really fine filter or pasteurize your beer, you have residual yeast, it will start converting those. So a really hoppy beer or a fruited beer, that yeast will start working with those sugars and it will then explode. So when the enzymes on the hops keep converting those starches to sugars, and it becomes much more of a higher attenuation, they say, because all the sugars converted, it becomes a much more bitter beer because the sugars aren't there anymore, and it creates CO2. Now, hop creep originally wasn't something to be avoided; it was something to be encouraged. It was something that was used in the barrels to keep the CO2 pressure up. So weirdly, English hops will the enzymes on English hops will convert the starches to sugars at the same rate that Brettanomyces will eat it. So this keeps the beer completely fresh. Because the CO2 is produced at the same rate that the wood will actually let it out. So this is something that we've been finding over the last few years by going into the history of it. Is you get a beer, an English style ale, you put it into a barrel with Brettanomyces and with English hops. Now, the English hops convert the remaining starches to sugars at the same rate that Brettanomyces eats it to produce carbon dioxide at the same rate as the wood lets it out. So the pressure in the barrel stays exactly the same for about 2.5 years.
Wow.
This is, you don't need drink fresh if you're using hop creep as a way of keeping the beer fresh. Adnams still put a handful of hops into their casks, so on their standard bitter. This is why whenever you vent a cask of Adnams bitter, it is a little bit on the lively side because of that extra CO2 that's been produced. But it means that the beer is fresh, just finished conditioning when you vent it. I would love to see some more brewers actually, rather than putting their beer into conditioning tanks at the brewery and pre-carbonating it and stick it into casks and sell it as cask beer, Ignore that. Actually understand what real ale hop creep actually is, so that when it goes to a pub and it's vented and it's tapped, that is when the conditioning stops, and that is when the beer is totally fresh. And one of the advantages that we've found with that is an unfined, properly sort of like conditioned beer like this will, once you vent and tap it, will last 4 to 5 weeks before it starts to deteriorate.
Wow.
So the whole like thing of, you know, a cask beer will only last 3 to 4 days. No, we're making beer quicker to sell it quicker, and it doesn't last as long. It goes off quicker. You make it slightly slower, and it will last a lot longer. So it's little things like that, and I just kind of wish other brewers would look at that and realize that they can increase their shelf life by, you know, on a cask of beer by about 4 or 5 weeks, or other things that they can do with it, learning about beer and history.
That's
so
brilliant.
Yeah, I am that sort of nerd.
But we're about to run out of time, so my final question is:
Sorry about that.
you've been through that journey of home brewer to, I guess, commercial brewer, and kind of back in a way now. What's your tip for any home brewers listening? I know we do the usual things like, you know, cleanliness and temperature control, but is there anything else kind of beyond those that you think, oh, I wish I'd known that back then, and maybe I would have been a bit more confident about it?
Yeah, ignore people.
I love it.
Seriously, people going about, oh, everything's got to be totally sterile. Really? So they were totally sterile back in the in history, or you've got to sort of like be doing all that. No, you don't. If your process makes good beer, stick with it. If you enjoy it, you're making it for yourself and you enjoy it, you do that. Don't change your process because somebody says you're doing it wrong if you enjoy what you're drinking. If you're doing it for commercial, then yeah, okay, maybe you need to look at those things. If you enjoy what you drink it. You absolutely do. It's like I keep saying to people, occasionally you'll see me behind the bar with a can of special brew in my hand because I love it.
Nothing wrong with that.
So that's exactly what I say. If you enjoy it, you do it.
Right. We're going to have to leave it there. Steve, thank you so much. It's been fantastic. And
welcome.
Have a look out for the Labels Off initiative. And yeah, just a big thank you to Steve Dunkley. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.